The heart medication sat empty on my nightstand for 3 weeks. I'd called Robert 7 times, texted Elizabeth daily. Even Michael, my youngest, ignored my pleas for help. They were executors of my late husband's business, but couldn't spare 20 minutes for a pharmacy run. The day I collapsed in public, alone and breathless on cold tile, was the day I stopped seeing my children as family. The nurse who held my hand in the hospital showed more compassion than my own blood. When I discovered they planned to declare me incompetent, sell my home, and place me in a facility, something clicked inside me. They saw a fading old woman. What they didn't see was the steel beneath the softness, the same steel that had built Wilson Properties from nothing. I changed my will that afternoon, and as I signed my name with perfect clarity, I smiled, knowing they'd soon learn. The quiet ones are the most dangerous when they finally decide to speak. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The empty pill bottle mocked me from my nightstand. I turned it over as if somehow more medication might materialize if I just tried hard enough. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone and dialed Robert's number for the 3rd time this week. The familiar voicemail greeting played in my ear again. "Hi, you've reached Robert Wilson. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." I doubted that. My own son hadn't returned my calls in days. I needed my heart medication refilled. And at 68 years old with a cardiac condition, going without it wasn't an option. "Robert, it's Mom again. I'm out of my heart pills. I was hoping you could pick up my refill today. Call me back when you can." I tried to keep the desperation out of my voice. They hated when I sounded needy. As Elizabeth had put it last month, I placed the phone down and gazed around my bedroom in the Victorian home that Thomas and I had lovingly restored. Over 40 years of marriage, the house felt so empty now without him. The silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. Sunday arrived with its usual routine. My 3 children appeared at my door with forced smiles and a bottle of expensive red wine. They knew I couldn't drink alcohol with my medication, but they always brought it anyway. For themselves, I supposed. "Mom, you look tired," Elizabeth said, by way of greeting, kissing my cheek. "I am a bit," I admitted. "I've been having trouble breathing. My medication ran out." Robert glanced at his watch. "Did you call the pharmacy? For delivery? They don't deliver. I've asked you 3 times this week if you could pick it up for me." Michael, my youngest, checked his phone. "I don't have any messages about medication." I called Robert. An uncomfortable silence fell. Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Well, someone can take you tomorrow, I'm sure. Let's not ruin Sunday dinner with logistics." I prepared the roast I'd managed to cook despite feeling lightheaded. As we sat around the dining table that had hosted countless family meals, I struggled to catch my breath between bites. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael asked, finally noticing. "Just need a moment?" I wheezed. Elizabeth checked her watch. "We should probably wrap this up soon. I have a conference call at 4. "On Sunday?" I asked. "International clients," she replied, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, not believing her but too tired to argue. "Before you go, could one of you take me to the pharmacy?" They exchanged glances. "I've got the kids' soccer practice," Michael said. "My call," Elizabeth reminded me. Robert sighed. "I need to prepare for a meeting tomorrow." "Can't the housekeeper take you when she comes on Tuesday?" "That's 2 days away," I said, my voice small. "You'll be fine for 2 days," Elizabeth said, patting my hand. "Don't be dramatic." After they left, I stood in the foyer of my empty house, listening to the sounds of their cars pulling away. I ran my hand along the banister Thomas had carved himself, remembering how he'd worked evenings and weekends to create something beautiful. For our home, he would be heartbroken to see how things had changed. The next day, Elizabeth was supposed to drive me to my cardiologist appointment. I put on my good dress, applied a touch of lipstick, and waited on the porch. My phone rang 20 minutes before the appointment. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but this meeting came up that I absolutely cannot miss. Can we reschedule the doctor for next week?" I sat on the porch for 2 hours afterward, partly because I didn't want to admit she wasn't coming, and partly because I wasn't sure I had the energy to climb the stairs back to my bedroom that evening. I found Thomas's old toolbox in the garage. Inside was a small video camera he'd bought years ago to record the children's recitals and games. On impulse, I turned it on. "This is Judith Wilson," I said to the camera. "Today is April 10th, 2023. I'm making this recording because... I paused, unsure how to articulate the growing unease I felt about my children's behavior. "Because I need to document what's happening. My children are neglecting my care, and I'm afraid of what might happen." I recorded the empty medication bottle, the calendar with Elizabeth's canceled appointment, the voicemail log showing my unanswered calls. It felt dramatic, but Thomas had always said to document everything. Memories fail, Judith, but records don't lie, he would say. 2 days later. With still no help from my children, I decided to walk the 3 blocks to the pharmacy myself. I made it almost to the door before the dizziness overwhelmed me. The sidewalk rushed up to meet me as darkness closed in from the edges of my vision. I woke to the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room. A machine beeped steadily beside me and an IV dripped into my arm. "Welcome back," a gentle voice said. I turned to see a nurse adjusting my IV. Her name tag read Abigail. "What happened?" I asked, my throat dry. "You collapsed at Willow Grove Pharmacy. Your blood pressure was dangerously low. The pharmacist recognized you as a regular customer whose prescriptions often went unclaimed." I closed my eyes, embarrassment washing over me. My children were supposed to pick them up. Abigail's face remained carefully neutral, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. "Well, you're here now, and we're taking good care of you." That first night in the hospital was one of crushing loneliness. No one had visited. No one had even called to check why I wasn't answering my phone at home. Abigail found me crying silently. "Around midnight, can I get you anything for pain?" she asked, misinterpreting my tears. "No, I'm not in pain. At least, not the kind medication can fix." She sat on the edge of my bed. "Want to talk about it?" "My children don't know I'm here," I confessed. "Or if they do, they haven't bothered to come." Abigail squeezed my hand. Sometimes the people who should care the most care the least. I've seen it too many times in this job. "They weren't always like this," I said, defending them out of habit. "After their father died 5 years ago, something changed. The business took over their lives." "The business, Wilson Properties. My husband built it from nothing. The children run it now, though I'm still the majority shareholder." The next morning, my room suddenly filled with my children, all talking at once. "Mom, why didn't you call us? We were worried sick. The hospital should have contacted us immediately." Dr. Reynolds, my cardiologist, entered behind them. "Your mother was admitted with dangerously low blood pressure and signs of cardiac distress. She hadn't been taking her medication. She must have forgotten," Elizabeth said quickly. "She's been forgetful lately." "I didn't forget," I said firmly. "I ran out. I asked for help getting my refill, but no one would take me." An uncomfortable silence fell. Dr. Reynolds looked between us, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Wilson needs consistent medication management," he said. "Her condition is serious but manageable with proper care." As he continued explaining my treatment plan, I noticed my children huddled near the window, speaking in hushed tones. They thought I couldn't hear them, but the hospital room wasn't that large. "We need to talk about streamlining the company," Robert murmured. "The Westside properties are underperforming." "Not now," Elizabeth hissed. "Later, at the office." "She'll be here for at least a few days," Michael replied. "It's a good opportunity to reorganize without interruption." I closed my eyes, pretending to rest. They spoke about the business I still owned, as if I were already gone. That evening, Abigail helped me sit up to sort through a small stack of mail that Robert had brought from home as an afterthought. Among the bills and advertisements were several birthday cards I'd saved over the years. "Your birthday?" Abigail asked, noticing the dates. "I keep them all," I explained, opening one from Elizabeth from 5 years ago. The message was warm, personal, filled with inside jokes and memories. Then I opened last year's card. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love, Elizabeth." That was all. "People get busy," Abigail said kindly. "Too busy for 2 sentences." I asked, then regretted. My bitterness, "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear an old woman complain about her ungrateful children." "Actually," Abigail said, checking my vitals, "I understand better than you might think. My own mother hasn't spoken to me in 12 years. Why not? She didn't approve of my pregnancy at 22. Unmarried father, not in the picture. She said I'd ruined my life and hers." Abigail smiled sadly. "My daughter's in college now, studying medicine. Best thing that ever happened to me." For the first time in months, I found myself engaged in a genuine conversation. Not the surface-level niceties I exchanged with my children, but something real. As Abigail shared her story, I realized how starved I'd been for human connection. The next morning, I was startled awake by raised voices outside my door. "This isn't the medication listed in her chart," Abigail was saying firmly. "Mrs. Wilson has a documented allergy to this class of drugs. The doctor ordered it." Another voice responded defensively. "Then the doctor made a mistake. I'm not administering it until we clarify." Minutes later, Abigail entered with a different medication cup. "Sorry about that," she said. "Sometimes things get mixed up." Always good to double check. You might have just saved my life, I said, only half joking. Just doing my job, she replied, but I could tell she took pride in her attention to detail. As we talked, Abigail noticed the family photo on my nightstand. It showed Thomas and me surrounded by our children about 10 years ago, all smiling. On the deck of our lake house, tell me about them, she said, gesturing to the photo. That's Robert, my oldest. He was always the serious one, like his father. Elizabeth came next, brilliant, determined. And Michael, the baby, always trying to keep up with his siblings. You must be proud of them. I said, then corrected myself. I am. They're successful in their ways. The business, their father built, is thriving under their management. They have beautiful homes, children in private schools. But, Abigail prompted gently, but somewhere along the way they stopped seeing me as a person. I became an obligation, a task on their to-do lists. That night, pain kept me awake. Abigail found me staring at the ceiling around 2 a.m. Can't sleep, she asked, preparing my medication. Thinking too much, I admitted. Abigail, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? She sat in the chair beside my bed. Of course, I'm not afraid of dying. After Thomas passed, I made peace with my own mortality. But I am afraid of dying alone, with my children waiting in the hallway, discussing which of them gets the silver service and who takes the vacation property. That's a reasonable fear, Abigail said, her honesty refreshing. Have you talked to them about it? They don't want to discuss anything morbid, I said, making air quotes. But ignoring death doesn't make it go away. The next day, Abigail brought me a legal pad. You mentioned wanting to make some arrangements, she said simply, placing it on my tray with a pen. I was touched by her thoughtfulness. Thank you, it's your life, she said. You should have some control over it. Later that afternoon, I overheard Elizabeth on her phone in the hallway. No, I can't make it. Mom's still in the hospital. Yes, I know it's Tyler's graduation. Send him my love. My grandson was graduating high school and I hadn't even known. No one had told me. No invitation had come. The next day, Abigail brought me the local newspaper. There was Tyler in his cap and gown receiving an award for mathematics. My own, flesh and blood, and I was a stranger to his achievements. Are you okay? Abigail asked, noticing my tears. My grandson, I said, pointing to the photo. I didn't even know he was graduating. During her break the next day, Abigail wheeled me down to the hospital garden. It was against protocol. I wasn't cleared for excursions yet, but she saw how the walls were closing in on me. Fresh air does more healing than people realize, she said, positioning my wheelchair in a patch of sunlight. The garden was small but well tended, with spring flowers beginning to bloom. I closed my eyes and turned my face to the sun, feeling human again. You could get in trouble for this, I observed. Some rules are worth bending, she replied. Besides, I've worked here 7 years with a spotless record. They'll forgive me one garden visit. Over the next few days, Abigail and I developed a routine. She would come early before her shift to share coffee with me, and we would talk about everything and nothing. During one of these conversations, I learned that her daughter, Lily, was struggling to afford textbooks for her pre-med program. Tuitions covered by her scholarship, thank goodness, Abigail explained. But the books, housing, meal plan, it adds up. I'm working double shifts when I can, but she trailed off, shaking her head. You're a good mother, I told her, she said with a tired smile. Some days are harder than others. On my 5th day in the hospital, I asked Abigail to contact my attorney. His name is Harold Harrington. His office is on Main Street, above the old bookstore. Abigail raised an eyebrow, but asked no questions. I'll call him during my lunch break. Mr. Harrington arrived that afternoon, his familiar weathered briefcase in hand. Abigail stood guard outside my door, ensuring we wouldn't be interrupted. Judith, Mr. Harrington said warmly, taking my hand. How are you feeling? Like I've had a wake-up call, Harold. I need to make some changes to my will. His expression turned serious. That's a significant decision. Are you sure you want to discuss this now? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. As my discharge date approached, Abigail helped me create a detailed health management plan. Meanwhile, my children were arguing over who would deal with me next. I took her last time, Robert insisted, during a visit they thought I was sleeping through. I have the charity gala this weekend, Elizabeth countered. My house doesn't have a first-floor bedroom, Michael added. It wouldn't work. None of them asked what I wanted. Once home, I called a family meeting. All 3 of my children arrived looking put upon, as if I'd demanded they fly across the country rather than drive 10 minutes from their homes. Thank you for coming, I began. I wanted to discuss my care going forward. We've been talking about that, Elizabeth said. We think it might be time to consider assisted living. I don't need assisted living, I said firmly. I need help with transportation to medical appointments and pharmacy runs. Mom, we all work full-time, Robert said. We can't just drop everything whenever you need something. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking for basic support. They exchanged glances, and I could see them silently negotiating who would bear the burden of helping their mother stay alive after they left, each with a vague promise to figure something out. I called Dr. Matthews for a second opinion. Abigail, on her day off, arrived to drive me to the appointment. You didn't have to do this, I told her. It's your only free day this week. I don't mind, she said simply. Dr. Matthews was more direct than my regular physician. Mrs. Wilson, your heart condition is more serious than you may have been led to believe. Without consistent medication management, you're at high risk for a major cardiac event. On the drive home, I made a decision. Abigail, would you consider being my private nurse? I can pay you better than the hospital does, and the hours would be more regular? She looked surprised. Are you sure? What about your family? My family has made their priorities clear. I'm using money from my personal account. They don't need to know. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Judith Wilson speaking. Judy, it's Will. I nearly dropped the phone. My brother William and I had been close once, but my children had discouraged contact after a disagreement over property lines at the lake house years ago. Will, how did you find out I was ill? Small Towns Judy News Travels. Someone who volunteers. At the hospital, mentioned seeing you there. Why didn't you call me? It's been 5 years, I said, tears threatening. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. You're my sister, he said simply. That doesn't change because our kids can't get along. The next day, I met Mr. Harrington at a coffee shop several towns over, where there was no chance of running into anyone who knew me. I've drafted the changes you requested, he said, sliding a folder across the table. But Judith, are you absolutely certain? This will cause significant ... discord. I'm certain, I said, reviewing the documents. My children have shown me who they are. It's time I believed them. Anticipating challenges to my mental capacity, I voluntarily underwent a psychological evaluation with a respected geriatric specialist. Dr. Winters was thorough but kind. Mrs. Wilson, you're one of the sharpest patients I've seen in months, she told me afterward. There's no question of your capacity to make your own decisions. That evening, I went to Thomas's study, a room my children rarely entered. Behind his collection of first-edition novels was a false panel containing important company documents. I removed them carefully, carrying them to the dining room table to review. What I found shocked me. Unauthorized transfers from the company's main accounts to personal projects. Loans against properties I didn't know about. My signature forged on documents I'd never seen. My phone buzzed with a text from Abigail. Outside your house, Robert. Here, confronting me? I hurried to the front door to find Robert standing over Abigail on my porch, his finger in her face. I don't know what you're playing at, he was saying, but if you think you can worm your way into my mother's life for money, you're mistaken. Robert Allen Wilson, I snapped, channeling the mother voice that had once been able to stop him. In his tracks, you will not speak to my guest that way. He turned startled. Mom, this woman is taking advantage of you. She's not even qualified to be a private nurse. She has 7 years of hospital experience and a nursing degree. And unlike my children, she makes sure I don't collapse in public from lack of medication. Robert's face flushed. We're busy people, Mom. We can't be at your beck and call. No one's asking you to be. Now, please leave my property. After he left, I led Abigail to my bedroom and showed her the hidden safe in my wall. This contains Thomas's letters to me, the video diary I've been keeping, and now these company documents. If anything happens to me, I need you to make sure. These get to Mr. Harrington. Nothing's going to happen to you, she said firmly. Promise me. I promise. That night, after Abigail left for her evening shift at the hospital, I sat alone in Thomas's chair, his photograph in my lap. Am I doing the right thing? I asked his smiling face. They're still our children, but I knew what Thomas would say. He had been a kind man, but a fair one. Love doesn't mean allowing people to take advantage of you, he often told our children. It was time I heeded his wisdom myself. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington. I'm ready to sign the new will. After 2 weeks under Abigail's consistent care, my health improved dramatically. My blood pressure stabilized, my breathing became easier, and I had more energy than I'd had in months. Dr. Reynolds was surprised at my recovery during my follow-up appointment. Whatever you're doing, Mrs. Wilson, keep doing it. These are the best numbers I've seen from you in years. When my children visited that Sunday, they seemed taken aback by my improved condition. You look well, Elizabeth said, studying my face. Better than at the hospital. Amazing what proper medication management can do, I replied. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed at my tone. How exactly is your care being managed? I've hired Abigail Crawford, the nurse from the hospital, as my private caregiver. The silence that followed was deafening. For how long? Robert finally asked. Indefinitely. She's moved into the guest room to provide round-the-clock care. Elizabeth's phone was in her hand immediately. I need to cancel my flight to Paris, she muttered, stepping into the hallway. Your flight? I asked when she returned. Just a small vacation. Nothing important. Clearly there are matters to attend to here. The next day, Michael arrived unannounced. He was unusually attentive, asking about my medication schedule and whether Abigail had references. His questions seemed innocent enough, but I'd been married to a lawyer for 40 years. I recognized an interrogation when I saw one. After he left, Abigail showed me a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Crawford, I'm conducting a background check on you for the Wilson family. Please call to provide character references. There. Investigating you? I said, anger rising in my chest. Let them, Abigail replied calmly. I have nothing to hide. That evening, I gave Abigail my mother's cameo brooch. A treasured piece I'd worn on special occasions throughout my marriage. I can't accept this, she protested. It's a family heirloom, and I'm giving it to someone I consider family, I insisted. Please, it would make me happy to see it worn and appreciated. The next day, Elizabeth stopped by while Abigail was wearing the brooch, her eyes fixed on it immediately. That's grandmother's cameo, she said sharply. Why are you wearing my mother's jewelry? I gave it to her, I intervened. As a thank you gift, Elizabeth's face contorted. You gave away a family heirloom to someone you've known for a month. Mother, are you losing your mind? My mind is perfectly sound, I replied. Unlike my children's sense of priority, after Elizabeth stormed out, I received an unexpected visitor. Jennifer, Robert's wife, arrived looking nervous. I can't stay long, she said, declining my offer of tea. Robert doesn't know I'm here. What's wrong, Jennifer? They're planning to challenge your competency, she blurted. Robert, Elizabeth, and Michael met with a lawyer yesterday. They're going to seek guardianship and have Abigail removed. My heart sank. Why are you telling me this? Jennifer twisted her wedding ring because it's wrong. What they're doing is wrong. You took care of Robert's father when he had cancer, and you helped us with the down payment on our house. You deserve better than this. The next day, my children insisted on accompanying me to my cardiology appointment. Their sudden interest in my health would have been touching if I didn't know their true motivation. While Dr. Reynolds checked my vitals, I overheard Robert in the hallway. We're concerned about her mental state. He was saying to someone, sudden changes in behavior, giving away family heirlooms, allowing a stranger to move into her home, ... I recognized the strategy. Thomas had used it often in court. Establish a narrative of incapacity, then use it to seize control. When I returned home, I discovered key financial documents missing from my study. The children were building a case against me, gathering evidence of my supposed incompetence. The following week, I decided to attend the monthly board meeting of Wilson Properties. My arrival caused a stir. The conference room fell silent as I entered. Mother Robert recovered first. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. But as majority shareholder, I thought I should make an appearance. The meeting was tense. I questioned several decisions that had been made without my knowledge, including the sale of a commercial property I'd specifically wanted to keep in the portfolio afterward. Elizabeth caught up with me in the parking lot. Mother, we need to talk. All of us as a family. I'm listening, not here. Tonight, at your house. I knew what was coming. Very well. 7 o'clock. When I arrived home, Abigail sensed my unease. What happened? They're coming tonight? For an intervention, I suspect. Do you want me to stay? No, I said, squeezing her hand. This is a conversation I need to have alone. At 7 sharp, all 3 of my children arrived, accompanied by a man they introduced as Dr. Peters, a geriatric specialist. I recognized the Tactican independent medical professional who was anything but. Mom, Robert began, once we were seated in the living room, we're concerned about your well-being. You've been making impulsive decisions, Elizabeth continued, the private nurse, giving away family heirlooms. ... And there's the issue of the company, Michael added. You've been interfering with business operations. You mean I've been questioning your unauthorized use of company funds? I countered. They exchanged glances. This is exactly what we mean, Robert said. These paranoid accusations show me the company books. I interrupted, prove me wrong. Another uncomfortable silence fell. Mom, Elizabeth said softly, adopting a tone one might use with a child, we think it's time for Abigail to go. If you don't dismiss her, we'll be forced to seek legal guardianship for your protection. I looked at each of my children in turn. These were the babies I had nursed, the toddlers whose tears I had dried, the teenagers I had guided through heartbreak and triumph. When had they become these strangers who saw me as an obstacle rather than a person? I see, I said finally. Is that all? Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Michael pleaded. You have 24 hours to dismiss the nurse, Robert stated. Or we file the guardianship papers. After they left, I went to my bedroom and discovered what I had suspected might be their small recording device hidden behind my bedside. Photo. They were collecting evidence, documenting anything that could suggest mental decline. I picked up the device and spoke directly into it. To my children who have resorted to spying on their mother, you have shown me exactly who you are. I suggest you prepare for what comes next. After discovering the recording device, I knew I needed to act quickly. The ultimatum my children had delivered hung in the air like a guillotine blade: dismiss Abigail. Within 24 hours or face a guardianship hearing. I had no intention of doing either. The next morning, Abigail drove me to meet with Patricia Lawson, an attorney specializing in elder rights. Her office was in a converted Victorian house on the edge of town, far from the corporate downtown building where my children might have connections. Mrs. Wilson, Patricia greeted me, her handshake firm. I've reviewed the notes you sent over. Let's discuss your options. For the next hour, Patricia explained the legal landscape I was facing. Her no-nonsense approach was exactly what I needed. A guardianship proceeding is serious, she said. Your children will need to prove you're incapable of making sound decisions. Based on our conversation and the psychological evaluation you already obtained, I don't see that happening, but we need to be prepared. What's our first step? I asked. Documentation, Patricia replied. We need to establish a clear record of your competence and your children's behavior. When we left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced. In Month's Hope, on the drive home, Abigail glanced at me. You seem lighter. I am, I admitted. For too long I've been reacting to my children's maneuvers. It's time I started making some moves of my own. The next day I had an appointment with Dr. Reynolds. I asked him directly for a formal assessment of my cognitive function and decision-making capacity. May I ask why you need this, Mrs. Wilson? He inquired, concern evident in his expression. My children are threatening to seek guardianship, I said simply. I need to establish that I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Dr. Reynolds frowned. I've been your physician for 15 years, Judith. There's absolutely nothing in your medical history that would justify a guardianship. Will you put that in writing? I'll have it ready by tomorrow, with medical documentation. Underway, I turned my attention to the family business. After my surprise appearance at the board meeting, I knew my children would be scrambling to cover their tracks. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. Thomas had insisted on built-in safeguards when he established Wilson Properties. I called Frank Stevens, the company's original accountant who had retired 5 years earlier, right after Thomas died. Frank, it's Judith Wilson. Judith, what a lovely surprise. How are you? I need your help, Frank. It's about the company. There was a pause. I've been hearing things through the grapevine. Nothing good. Then you won't be surprised by what I'm about to ask. I need a forensic audit of Wilson Properties. Off the books, completely confidential. The kids won't like that, he warned. The kids don't need to know, not yet. Frank agreed to connect me with a trusted colleague who specialized in forensic accounting. By that afternoon, I had engaged Melissa Harper to conduct a thorough investigation of the company's finances. This will take time, Melissa warned. During our initial call, and if what you suspect is true, the findings could be difficult to process. I'm prepared for that, I assured her, though I wasn't entirely certain it was true. The doorbell rang early the next morning. I opened it to find my brother William standing on the porch, suitcase in hand, while I exclaimed, embracing him. What are you doing here? Jennifer called me, he explained as I ushered him inside. Robert's wife? She's worried about what? They're planning to do. She told me they were seeking guardianship, but I didn't know she'd contact you. Will set his suitcase down in the foyer. She found my number in Robert's old address book. Said she couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. Having Will in the house changed everything. Not only was he another witness to my competence, but his presence seemed to deter my children from their more aggressive tactics. When Elizabeth stopped by that afternoon and found her uncle in the kitchen, her planned confrontation deflated visibly. Uncle Will, she said, recovering quickly. What a surprise. Is it? He replied mildly. My sister's in trouble. Where else would I be? Elizabeth's eyes darted between us. Mom's not in trouble. We're just concerned about her well-being, concerned enough to bug her bedroom. Will asked, placing the recording device we'd found on the counter between them. Elizabeth blanched. That's not T.I. Don't know what that is. Don't insult our intelligence, Lizzie, I said quietly, using her childhood nickname deliberately. It doesn't become you. After Elizabeth left, I turned to Will. Thank you for coming, but this isn't your battle to fight. The hell it isn't, he replied, his voice gentle despite the words. Remember when Dad died and Mom started giving away his things to random people at church? Everyone thought she'd lost her mind. I nodded, remembering the family crisis that had unfolded 30 years earlier. But you stood by her, Will continued. You were the only one who asked why she was doing it. Turns out Dad had promised those items to those specific people, and Mom was honoring his wishes. I'd forgotten about that, I admitted. Well, haven't? You taught me that day to look deeper than the surface. So that's what I'm doing now. That evening, I called several friends from my teaching days colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months, partly due to my declining health, but also because my children had subtly discouraged these connections. Judith, we've been worried about you, Marion Peterson exclaimed when I called. Elizabeth told us you weren't up for visitors when we tried to come by after your hospital stay. She what? I was stunned. Marion, I never knew you tried to visit. Similar conversations with other friends revealed a pattern. My children had been systematically isolating me, screening my calls and visitors under the guise of protecting me. The next day, Abigail and I drove to a bank across town where I opened a new safe deposit box. In it, I placed the original copy of my psychological evaluation, Dr. Reynolds' medical assessment, the video diary I'd been keeping, and copies of key company documents. Only you and I have access to this, I told Abigail as we left the bank. No matter what happens, these documents stay safe. That afternoon, Will and I sat on the veranda, drinking iced tea and catching up on the years we'd lost to family squabbles. As the conversation turned to our parents, Will revealed something I'd never known. Do you remember Aunt Madeline, Dad's sister? Of course, I replied. She lived in that beautiful house on Lake Champlain. Did you ever wonder how she ended? Up there, that house had been in Dad's family for generations. I frowned. I assumed she inherited it. She did, but not the way you think. When Grandpa was dying, his brother Gerald tried to have him declared incompetent. Gerald wanted the lake house and thought if Grandpa couldn't make his own decisions, he could influence the outcome. I never knew this, I said, shocked. Dad and Aunt Madeline fought it. They won, and Grandpa was so disgusted by Gerald's behavior that he left the lake house solely to Madeline, even though it had always been intended for both of them to share. The parallels to my current situation weren't lost on me. History repeats itself, I murmured. And that's why your current will is so important, Will said. It's not just about the assets, Judy. It's about sending a message about what behavior you're willing to tolerate. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from my children's attorney suggesting incompetence proceedings. If I didn't agree to a psychiatric evaluation with their chosen doctor, Abigail found me staring at it in the kitchen. What would Thomas do? She asked after reading it over my shoulder. I smiled, thinking of my late husband's strategic mind. He'd respond with dignity, then prepare for war. Together, Abigail and I drafted a response, which Patricia Lawson reviewed before sending. It was polite, measured, and absolutely unyielding. Later that day, an unexpected visitor arrived, a property assessor, who claimed he was conducting routine valuations for the county. His questions, however, focused suspiciously on the home's marketability and potential sale value. Who sent you? I asked directly after his third question about how quickly the house could be listed. The man shifted uncomfortably. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Your job for whom? Because the county assessor is Janet Williams, and you're certainly not her. After he left, I called Patricia. They're planning to sell my house, I said without preamble. They can't sell what? They don't own, she replied calmly. But this suggests they're confident about the guardianship. We need to be ready. The stress of the situation took its toll that evening. As Will, Abigail and I were discussing strategy at the dining room table. A sharp pain lanced through my chest. I gasped, clutching at my blouse. Judith. Abigail was instantly in nurse mode, checking my pulse. Are you having chest pain? I nodded, unable to speak as the pressure increased. Will called 911 while Abigail helped me lie down and administered the emergency nitroglycerin spray Dr. Reynolds had prescribed. By the time the ambulance arrived, the worst had passed, but they insisted on taking me to the hospital for evaluation. It wasn't a full heart attack, just a warning episode brought on by stress, but it was enough to frighten all of us. What I didn't expect was how my children would use it against me. I spent only one night in the hospital, but by the time I returned home, my children had filed for emergency guardianship. The court notice was waiting for me on my kitchen table. How they had gained entry to my house to deliver it, I could only guess. Emergency guardianship. will read the document, his face darkening. On what grounds? Acute cardiac episode demonstrating inability to manage health concerns, I read aloud. They're using my heart scare against me. Abigail shook her head. That's ridiculous. Your vital signs have been stable for weeks under the care plan we established. One stress-induced episode doesn't change that. They don't care about medical facts, I said bitterly. They care about gaining control. Patricia called an hour later. We have a hearing scheduled for Friday, she informed me. That gives us 3 days to prepare. The next morning, Robert took his strategy to a new level. When Abigail and I arrived at the Wilson Properties office to collect documents for Patricia, we found the locks had been changed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, the receptionist said, looking genuinely distressed. Mr. Wilson left instructions that no one is to enter without his authorization. I own this company, I reminded her. I don't need authorization. I know, ma'am, but the security system has been updated and I don't have the new codes. As we turned to leave, Robert emerged from the elevator. His surprise at seeing me quickly morphed into cold determination. Mother, you should be resting after your ... episode. I'm here for the quarterly financial records, the ones I'm entitled to as majority shareholder. All records requests need to go through proper channels now, he replied smoothly. Company policy? Since when? Since the board meeting yesterday. A board meeting I wasn't informed of, I noted. That makes any decisions made there invalid. Robert's jaw tightened. You're not well, Mother? The doctor made that clear. Which doctor? The one who's actually treated me for 15 years, or the one you hired to support your guardianship case? Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened again and Elizabeth stepped out. She froze when she saw me. What's going on? She demanded. Your mother is making a scene, Robert said. Again, I'm not making a scene, I replied evenly. I'm requesting access to financial records I'm legally entitled to view. Elizabeth glanced nervously at the receptionist, who was pretending not to listen. This isn't the place to discuss family matters. It ceased to be merely a family matter when you filed for guardianship, I said, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Now it's a legal matter. 2 days later, Elizabeth created an even more public spectacle. During my follow-up appointment with Dr. Reynolds, she burst into the examination room. Dr. Reynolds, I need to speak with you about my mother's condition. Mrs. Wilson is my patient, he replied calmly. Unless she consents, I can't discuss her medical information with you. That woman, Elizabeth pointed at Abigail, who stood quietly beside me, has been interfering with my mother's care. She's isolating her from family and manipulating her for financial gain. Dr. Reynolds' eyebrows rose. These are serious accusations. They're also completely false, I interjected. Abigail is the reason I'm alive and well today. Elizabeth's voice rose. She's turned you against your own children. She's after your money. Other patients in the waiting room were openly staring now. A security guard approached, drawn by the commotion. Ms. Wilson, he said firmly, I need to ask you to lower your voice or step outside. This is a family matter, she insisted. Not when it disrupts a medical facility, the guard replied. Please step outside. Elizabeth left, but the damage was done. The public scene had drawn attention to our family conflict in exactly the way my children had always claimed to abhor. The irony wasn't lost on me that evening. Someone leaked details of my revised will to my children. I never discovered who, perhaps a clerk at Mr. Harrington's office or someone at the courthouse where it had been filed. Regardless, the result was explosive. Robert, Elizabeth, and Michael arrived at my home simultaneously. Clearly coordinated in their attack. They didn't bother to knock, using Michael's old emergency key to let themselves in. Is it true? Robert demanded as they cornered me in the living room. You've left everything to that nurse. Not everything, I replied calmly. Your children still receive educational trusts, but yes, Abigail is my primary beneficiary. Have you lost your mind? Elizabeth shrieked. We're your children. Children who bugged my bedroom. Children who tried to sell my house from under me. Children who abandoned me when I needed heart medication. This won't stand, Michael said, speaking for the first time. No court will uphold a will that disinherits children in favor of a caregiver who's known you for mere months. We'll see about that, I replied. The preliminary guardianship hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. I dressed carefully in a blue suit Thomas had always admired, applied light makeup, and styled my hair. Appearance shouldn't matter in legal proceedings, but Patricia had been blunt. Judges were human, and first impressions counted. Remember, she advised as we walked into the courthouse, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. And most importantly, stay calm no matter what they claim. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. My children sat at one table with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Victoria Simmons. Abigail sat behind me and Patricia. Judge Howard Pearson presided, an older man with a reputation for fairness. He began by outlining the purpose of the hearing. This is a preliminary determination on whether emergency guardianship is warranted, he explained. It is not a final ruling on Mrs. Wilson's competence. Victoria Simmons presented my children's case first, painting a picture of a grieving widow whose health and mental state had deteriorated rapidly after her husband's death. Mrs. Wilson has made increasingly erratic decisions, she argued, giving away family heirlooms, changing her will to benefit a virtual stranger, interfering with a business she hadn't shown interest in for years. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and directly, detailing the neglect that had led to my hospitalization and the discovery of my children's financial maneuvers. Your Honor, I'm not an incapacitated elderly woman being manipulated by a caregiver, I concluded. I'm a mother responding to my children's actions with the only recourse I have left, protecting what my husband and I built from those who don't respect it. Victoria Simmons's cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. For every accusation, I had a clear, rational explanation. Mrs. Wilson, why would you leave a family business to someone with no experience in property management? Abigail won't be running the business, I explained. The existing management team will continue, with Abigail as majority shareholder, ensuring my husband's ethical standards are maintained. As the hearing progressed, William provided devastating testimony about our family history and the financial irregularities he'd observed in recent years. When I arrived last week, he testified, I found company documents indicating unauthorized loans against properties, with what appears to be my sister's forged signature on several documents. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. What had begun as a concerned family seeking protection for their mother was transforming into something much darker. By the afternoon, local media had caught wind of the case. A reporter from the town newspaper sat in the back row taking notes. My children, who had always valued their public image, looked increasingly uncomfortable. During a brief recess, Victoria Simmons approached Patricia. We're willing to drop the guardianship petition if your client agrees to family counseling and reconsiders the will, she offered. Patricia glanced at me. My client is not interested in negotiating under duress, she replied. If your clients wish to repair their relationship with their mother, they can do so without legal coercion. When the hearing resumed, one of the most damning pieces of evidence emerged, the testimony of former household staff and neighbors, about how rarely my children visited except when they needed signatures on documents. Mrs. Davis, who had cleaned my house weekly for over a decade, recounted finding me struggling to reach medication bottles placed on high shelves, despite my children knowing about my arthritis. They'd come by with papers for her to sign, she testified, but when I mentioned her needing help with daily tasks, they always had somewhere else to be. By the end of the day, several of my grandchildren had been called to testify visibly. Uncomfortable with their role in the proceedings, Tyler, Robert's son, admitted his parents had coached him on what to say about my behavior. They told me to say Grandma gets confused about who I am sometimes, he confessed, unable to meet my eyes. But that's not true. She's always known exactly who I am. The hearing was set to continue the next day, but that evening a new complication arose. My children's attorney filed an emergency motion seeking to have Abigail barred from continuing as my caregiver, claiming she was under investigation for nursing license violations. It's a complete fabrication, Abigail said when Patricia called to inform us. My license is in good standing. I've never had a single complaint. They're getting desperate, Patricia observed, but this means Abigail can't continue caring for you until this is resolved. That's exactly what they want, I realized. With Abigail gone, they'll claim I can't manage on my own, strengthening their guardianship case. Will stepped up immediately. I'll stay with Judy. They can't object to her own brother providing care. Though the accusation against Abigail was clearly tactical, the judge had no choice but to temporarily remove her from my care pending investigation. As she packed a small bag to stay with her daughter, I felt a crushing sense of loss. I'll be back, she promised. They can't keep me away for long. With Abigail gone, the house felt emptier than ever. Will did his best, but he wasn't a trained nurse, and we both felt Abigail's absence keenly. On the second night after she left, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into Thomas's study, seeking comfort in the space that still held his presence most strongly. As I sat in his leather chair, my hand brushed against a loose panel in the desk drawer, secret compartment I'd never known existed. Inside was a bundle of letters in unfamiliar handwriting. The first was addressed to my dearest Thomas and signed, "Always yours, Catherine." My hands trembled as I read letter after letter, dated from before Thomas and I had met. They revealed a relationship and a child that Thomas had never mentioned. Catherine had been his first love, pregnant with his baby when his family forced them apart. He had provided financial support for years, even after marrying me. The most shocking revelation came in the final letter, dated just a month before. Thomas died. I've told Robert, Elizabeth, and Michael the truth. They deserved to know about their half-sister. They've promised to respect your wishes to keep this from Judith until after you're gone. I hope someday she can forgive us all. I sat in stunned silence, the letters scattered around me. My children had known about Thomas's first family for 5 years and had kept it from me. But why? What purpose did this secrecy serve? The answer came the next morning. When Patricia arrived with news from our financial investigator, Melissa found something disturbing, she said, spreading documents across the dining room table. There's a series of loans taken against business properties, all using your signature, which I never provided, I confirmed. Exactly, but here's where it gets interesting. The funds didn't go to your children directly. They went to a trust for someone named Caroline Lambert. The name meant nothing to me, but a cold suspicion formed. When was the trust established? 5 years ago, right after Thomas died. Caroline Lambert? Catherine's daughter? Thomas's daughter? My children's half-sister? They've been supporting her using company funds, I realized. But why forge my signature? Why not just tell me the truth? Because the business was in your name, Will suggested. They needed your authorization for major financial decisions, and they were afraid you'd cut off support to this woman if you knew about her. They thought I'd be that petty. I was genuinely hurt that I'd punish an innocent woman for Thomas's actions decades ago. The revelation cast our entire conflict in a new light. My children's desperation to maintain control of the family business wasn't solely about greed, was also about protecting commitments they'd made to their half-sister. The next day, Tyler visited alone. My grandson had been visibly distressed during his court testimony, and I welcomed the chance to speak with him privately. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice shaking. "Mom and Dad told me to say things about you that weren't true. They said if I didn't help them, you might end up in a terrible nursing home." "It's all right, Tyler," I assured him. "You're caught in the middle of an adult conflict. That's not fair to you." "There's more," he continued. "Last week I overheard Mom on the phone with Briarwood Care Center. She was discussing admission paperwork. For you, they're planning to put you in a home regardless of what the court decides." His revelation confirmed my worst fears, but also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about my children punishing me for changing my will. They genuinely believed I was incapable of managing my own life, and had made plans accordingly. Meanwhile, Will had been doing research of his own. In the attic, he found boxes of records from the early days of Wilson Properties. "Judy, look at this," he said, bringing down a dusty folder. Inside were the original incorporation documents for the company. The seed money came from our parents' estate. Thomas built the business, but the foundation was your inheritance. This changed everything. My children had always treated the company as their father's legacy, something I was merely holding in trust for them. But it had been built on my family's resources from the beginning. On the 4th day of Abigail's absence, welcome news arrived. The nursing board had conducted an emergency review and found the allegations against her completely baseless. She was cleared to return to work immediately. Our reunion was tearful. "I knew they couldn't keep us apart for long," she said as we embraced. "They're getting desperate," I observed, "which means they know they're losing." That afternoon, Judge Pearson made an unprecedented decision. Frustrated by the conflicting testimonies, he announced he would conduct a home visit to assess my living conditions and capacity firsthand. "I rarely do this," he explained to the courtroom, "but this case warrants direct observation rather than hearsay." 2 days later, the judge arrived at my home, accompanied by a court clerk. I gave him a tour, showing him my medication management system Abigail had established, the calendar of my appointments, and the adaptations we'd made to accommodate my physical limitations. "Mrs. Wilson," Judge Pearson said as we sat in the kitchen afterward, "how would you describe your relationship with your children before this conflict began?" I considered the question carefully. Distant but cordial. After Thomas died, they became increasingly absorbed in the business. I understood that grief manifests differently for everyone. But over time, their visits became shorter, less frequent, and usually centered around business matters rather than family connection. The judge nodded, taking notes. "And when did you first become concerned about their handling of the company?" 3 months ago, when I discovered unauthorized property sales, but what truly alarmed me was their response when I questioned these transactions. Instead of providing explanations, they began suggesting my memory was failing. When the judge left, I felt cautiously optimistic. He had seen me in my own environment, managing well with appropriate support. That evening, Patricia called with surprising news. Victoria Simmons has withdrawn from the case, she reported. She filed a notice with the court this afternoon, citing professional considerations. What does that mean? I asked. It means she's seen evidence that made her uncomfortable continuing to represent your children. This is a significant development, Judith. The next morning, my children arrived with a new attorney. Their demeanor had changed. Dramatically gone was the righteous indignation, replaced with subdued calculation. We'd like to propose a settlement, the new attorney began. My clients are willing to withdraw the guardianship petition if Mrs. Wilson agrees to establish a family trust for the business, with her children as co-trustees. Patricia and I exchanged glances. And the will? I asked. That would remain your personal decision, the attorney replied carefully, though my clients hope you might reconsider certain aspects. It was a transparent attempt to salvage control of the business while abandoning the more difficult guardianship claim. They knew they were losing the larger battle and were trying to preserve what mattered most to them: access to the company's resources. I'll consider it, I said, though I had no intention of accepting their terms. But first, I want to meet Caroline Lambert. The shocked expressions on my children's faces confirmed what I already knew. The letters, the financial maneuvers, it all centered around Thomas's first child. How did you find out? Elizabeth finally asked. I found Thomas's letters, I replied. What I don't understand is why you kept this from me. Did you think I would be cruel to his daughter? Dad made us promise, Michael said quietly. He said the truth would hurt you unnecessarily. He planned to tell you himself, but then his cancer progressed so quickly, and afterward we continued supporting Caroline as he would have wanted, Robert added. The company was the easiest way to do that, by forging my signature. I challenged. We thought you wouldn't understand, Elizabeth admitted. Caroline needed help. Her mother died. She has medical issues of her own. Dad would have wanted us to take care of her. I shook my head, saddened by their lack of faith in me. You should have told me the truth. I would have honored Thomas's wishes. Instead, you chose deception, and in doing so, destroyed the trust between us. 3 days later, Judge Pearson delivered his ruling. The courtroom was packed, not only with immediate family, but with friends, former colleagues, and curious community members drawn by the newspaper coverage. In the matter of the guardianship of Judith Wilson, the judge began. This court finds insufficient evidence to support the petition. Mrs. Wilson has demonstrated capacity to manage her affairs with appropriate support systems, which she has arranged independently. Relief washed over me as he continued. Furthermore, this court finds disturbing evidence of financial impropriety and attempted manipulation that calls into question the petitioner's motives. The guardianship petition is hereby dismissed. My children sat stone-faced as the judge added a final, damning assessment. This case represents a troubling example of using guardianship proceedings as a tool for control rather than protection. I strongly advise the Wilson family to seek counseling to address the profound breakdown of trust evident in these proceedings. Outside the courthouse, reporters approached for comments, but Patricia deftly guided me to her car. We won, Judith. It's over. But it wasn't over. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. A week after the court victory, I called a meeting. At Wilson Properties, every board member, executive, and my 3 children were present, as I took my place at the head of the table. For 5 years, I began. This company has operated under the assumption that I was a figurehead, a temporary caretaker of my husband's legacy until my children could take full control. Today, that changes. I outlined my plan for restructuring the company. My children would be removed from their executive positions, but offered paths to earn them back based on merit and ethical conduct. Additionally, I continued. I'm establishing a formal position for Abigail Crawford as Ethics Compliance Officer, reporting directly to the board. The room erupted in protests, but I raised my hand for silence. This is not negotiable. However, before we implement these changes, there's one condition. Each of you, I looked directly at my children, will make a public apology at next week's company reception, acknowledging your actions and their consequences. A public humiliation, Robert muttered. A public accountability, I corrected. The choice is yours. Accept these terms or resign completely. They chose to stay, though the apologies delivered at the reception were clearly painful for them. Elizabeth, surprisingly, seemed the most genuinely remorseful. I lost sight of what matters, she admitted to the assembled business partners and friends. I betrayed my mother's trust and damaged our family in ways I'm only beginning to understand. In the weeks that followed, I established clear boundaries and conditions for rebuilding relationships with my children. Regular family dinners were mandatory, as was participation in family therapy. Most importantly, they were required to take turns assisting with my medical appointments, not as a punishment, but as a reminder of the basic care family members owe each other. For Abigail, I created not just a role in the company, but a partnership in the truest sense. Her organizational skills and ethical clarity made her an invaluable advisor as we navigated the restructuring. I never expected any of this, she confessed one evening, as we reviewed company reports on my patio. I was just doing my job at the hospital. You did much more than your job, I replied. You reminded me of my own worth when I'd forgotten it. For my grandchildren, I established educational trusts with ethical requirements attached. To receive their distributions, they would need to demonstrate community service and commitment to caring for others. I want them to understand that inheritance isn't a right, I explained to Will. It's a responsibility. Perhaps my most meaningful act was establishing the Wilson Family Foundation, dedicated to supporting elder care and education for healthcare workers. Using a portion of the company's profits, we launched programs to train nurses specifically in geriatric care and to provide resources for families caring for elderly relatives. I also transformed the east wing of my home into a small elder day center, where seniors could spend time in a home-like environment while their family caregivers worked or rested. You've turned pain into purpose, Abigail observed as we welcomed the first participants. Elizabeth, who had initially been the most hostile to Abigail, became unexpectedly committed to the day center. She began volunteering there weekly, using her organizational skills to coordinate activities and transportation. Why this sudden interest? I asked her one day as we prepared lunch for the guests. I met Carolyn, she replied simply. Thomas's daughter. Seeing how she cared for her mother through illness, how she honored her dignity even when Catherine couldn't remember her own name, it made me ashamed of how I treated you. Caroline sounds like someone I should meet, I suggested. She'd like that, Elizabeth said. She has Dad's eyes. 1 year after the court battle, I hosted a gathering at my home. Abigail and her daughter Lily were there, as was Will, my grandchildren, and even some of my reconciled children. Caroline Lambert stood nervously near the fireplace. Indeed, with Thomas's kind eyes, I rose to address them all, leaning slightly on the cane that had become necessary after a minor fall. A year ago, I thought I had lost my family forever, I began. What I've learned since then is that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's defined by care. Who shows up when you're in need, who values your dignity, who sees you as a person rather than a possession. I looked at each face and turned the children I had raised. The brother who had come to my rescue, the nurse who had become my champion, and the stepdaughter I was only beginning to know. Thomas used to say that the true measure of wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away with purpose. This past year has taught me that the same is true of love. The more freely you give it, the richer you become. I raised my glass to the true inheritance, not the money or the property or the business, but the legacy of how we care for one another. May we all be worthy of it. As the gathering continued, I watched the unlikely family we had become. Elizabeth and Caroline, deep in conversation by the window, discovering their shared love of painting. Robert's son Tyler showing Abigail's daughter Lily photos from his college campus, where she hoped to transfer next year. Even Michael, the most resistant to change, was helping Will arrange old family photos on the wall, finally including ones with his uncle. Abigail joined me on the sofa, handing me a cup of tea. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about how differently this all could have ended, I admitted. If I hadn't found my voice, if you hadn't been assigned to my hospital room that night, ... But you did, and I was, she said simply. That's what matters. Robert approached us hesitantly. In the years since the court battle, he had been the slowest to rebuild our relationship, his pride the most wounded by the public exposure of his actions. Mom, I was hoping we could talk about the West Side Project tomorrow. I've been researching some community-based approaches that might align with what you and Abigail have been doing with the foundation. I'd like that, I said, reaching for his hand. He took it, the first voluntary physical contact he'd initiated in months. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing in the foyer of the home Thomas and I had loved, the home I had almost lost. Caroline was the last to leave, pausing at the door. Thomas would be proud of you, she said softly. He always told me his Judith was the strongest person he knew. After everyone had gone, Abigail helped me upstairs. My bedroom, once bugged with recording devices by my suspicious children, had become a sanctuary again. On my nightstand sat the empty heart medication bottle that had started this journey. I'd kept it as a reminder. You know, I said as Abigail turned to leave, when I changed my will, I thought I was punishing my children. But really, I was just recognizing who had truly acted as family, and now, Now I understand that inheritance isn't just what we leave behind, it's also what we choose to carry forward. The kindness, the dignity, the care, that's what I want my legacy to be. Abigail smiled. I'd say you've already secured it. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt Thomas's presence warm and approving. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with new purpose. The business that had driven a wedge between generations now connected them through shared values, and the woman who had once sat alone with an empty pill bottle now rested peacefully, surrounded by a family bound, not just by blood, but by choice. The inheritance, I realized, had never been about the money at all. It had been about remembering our worth, reclaiming our voices, and recognizing true family when we find it wherever we find it. What price would you pay to teach ungrateful children the value of respect? If Judith's story of reclaiming her power moved you, like and subscribe for more tales of family betrayal and sweet justice. New stories every day that will make you question just how far you'd go when pushed too far.